Designing an aircraft is hard. Nobody is pretending otherwise. But every so often you look at a machine that real engineers built, that real money paid for, that real pilots were asked to trust with their lives, and you have to ask one simple question. What were they thinking? A fighter armed with guns that could only point backward. A flying gun platform that cooked its own engines while it sat on the runway. A giant bomber that drove its own nose into the dirt before it ever left the ground. Today, we are looking at 4 flying machines that were so badly thought through they were basically useless. And more than that, we are looking at the exact engineering decisions that doomed them, because none of these were unlucky. A few of them cost brave men their lives, and we will give those men their names. Every one of these machines was broken on purpose, by people who were completely sure they were right. We begin with a plane so slow it had to fight like a sailing ship. In the late 1930s, the British Royal Navy went looking for a new fighter, and it fell in love with an idea. Instead of a pilot aiming the whole aircraft at the enemy, why not hand the guns to a dedicated gunner in a powered turret? Let the pilot fly, let the gunner shoot, and cover the whole sky at once. On paper, it almost sounds modern. There was even a logic to it at the time. Planners assumed enemy bombers would arrive without fighter escort, so a machine that could slide underneath a formation and pour concentrated fire into it seemed clever. The Royal Air Force had already tried the idea on land, with the Boulton-Paul Defiant. The Roc was, in effect, the Navy's version of that same gamble. The machine they built around the idea was the Blackburn Roc, and it took that gamble and drove it straight off a cliff. The Roc carried 4 machine guns, and every one of them lived in a bulky electric turret sitting behind the cockpit. Here is the part that never quite makes sense. It had no guns that fired forward. None at all. A single seat fighter with all of its teeth pointing the wrong way. To attack anything, the Roc could not just chase it down and open fire. It had to pull up alongside its target and fire a broadside, like a wooden warship in the age of Nelson. That alone would have been a serious problem. It made the aircraft fight the way ships fought a century earlier, and by 1940 the war in the air had already moved far past that. But the turret made everything worse. All that weight and all that drag, bolted onto an airframe that was already based on a slow dive bomber, left the Roc barely able to reach 220 miles an hour, and only for a moment on emergency power. Its normal cruising speed was around 135. Read that back. This was a fighter that was slower than most of the bombers it was sent up to destroy. It could not catch them, and even if it somehow drew level, it could only shoot sideways. The Navy knew it too. Months before the Roc ever left the ground, it was already clear the thing was too slow to work as a fighter. In the entire Second World War, the Blackburn Roc is credited with a single confirmed kill, one German bomber brought down over the beaches of Dunkirk in the spring of 1940. After that, the Fleet Air Arm quietly did the sensible thing. It pulled the Roc out of frontline service and turned the survivors into target tugs. Some were parked at the edges of airfields with their engines removed entirely, the turrets left manned as fixed gun positions on the grass. A fighter that ended the war bolted to the ground, no longer even pretending to fly. Our second machine did not just fail, it killed the men who flew it, and it did so because of one idea its creator refused to let go of. The idea came from Dr. William Whitney Christmas, an American physician with a real gift for self-promotion and no training whatsoever in aircraft design. Christmas had convinced himself that the wings of every other aircraft in the world were wrong. They were stiff, braced with struts and wires, held rigid against the air. He believed a wing should do the opposite. It should be free to flex and bend and flap like the wing of a bird. So he designed a small fighter with cantilever wings that carried no external struts and no bracing wires at all. He even had the wing spars cut from thin sawmill blade steel so that the whole wing would supposedly bow upward more and more as the aircraft flew faster. In 1918, that clean strutless shape looked stunningly modern. Aviation magazines of the day ran glowing photographs and called the flexing wing a breakthrough. It was also structurally a death sentence. Here is the physics, and it really is not complicated. When a wing makes lift, that lift pulls the wing upward, and something has to hold it against the body of the aircraft. On a normal biplane of the day, the struts and wires did that job. Christmas took them away on purpose and asked the bare wood of the wing to bend dramatically in flight and somehow stay attached. The engineers at the company building it saw the problem straight away. The chief engineer pushed for changes. He was overruled and the aircraft was finished using materials that were not even proper aircraft grade, scrounged from whatever happened to be on hand. On its first flight over the fields of Long Island, the wings of the Christmas bullet twisted and peeled away from the fuselage, exactly as the physics said they would. The pilot, a young airmail flyer named Cuthbert Mills, was killed. His mother, by several accounts, was standing on the ground watching. Anyone else would have stopped there. Christmas did not. He hid the fact that the engine, loaned to him by the United States Army, had been destroyed in the crash, and he quietly built a second bullet. On its first flight, the wings failed again, and a second pilot, Lieutenant Allington Jolly, died the same way. And still, Christmas would not accept it. He blamed the pilots. He blamed unnamed saboteurs. He called the flights a success and kept right on promoting the machine, claiming it was the finest aircraft in the world, fast enough to fly across the ocean to Germany and pluck the Kaiser out of the war. He would later put a fantastical price tag on the design, as if the wreckage on Long Island had proven nothing at all. 2 men died to prove that a wing has to be held on, and the man who drew it never once admitted he was wrong. If you are the kind of person who wants to understand why a machine failed and not just watch it fall, then this channel is built for you. Take a second to subscribe and come back for the next one. It genuinely helps us keep telling these stories. Now back to the runway, and to an aircraft that sat its own crew down in front of the propellers. In 1937, the American company Bell Airacuda rolled out its very first design, and it was one of the strangest combat aircraft anyone had ever seen. It was called the Airacuda, and it was meant to be a bomber-destroyer, a heavy flying gun platform that would hang off the edge of an enemy formation and blast it apart with cannon fire. To make that work, Bell mounted 2 big Allison engines in a pusher layout, with the propellers facing backward behind the wings, and in front of each engine, tucked into the nose of each nacelle, they put a man, a gunner, seated directly ahead of a spinning propeller. In total, the Airacuda carried a crew of 5, including a dedicated fire control officer who aimed the cannon through a periscope sight that hung beneath the nose. Sit with that arrangement for a moment, because the crew certainly did. If one of those gunners ever had to bail out in an emergency, the propeller was right there behind him, turning. The solution Bell came up with tells you everything you need to know. They fitted the propellers with explosive bolts so the blades could be blown clean off the aircraft before a man jumped clear. That was the safety feature. And the pusher layout created a second, quieter problem. A normal engine gets a steady blast of air pulled over it by the propeller out in front. On the Airacuda, the propellers sat behind the engines, so on the ground there was almost no airflow to cool them at all. The aircraft tended to overheat while it was simply standing still, which meant it sometimes had to be towed out to the runway rather than taxi under its own power. Think about what that means. This was supposed to be an interceptor. Its whole reason to exist was to start fast and climb hard to meet an incoming raid, and it could overheat before it even began to move. There was more. So much of the aircraft ran off a single auxiliary generator that if that one unit failed, systems could die with it, the guns included, and the 37mm cannon it was built around fired so slowly, at such low velocity, that hitting a moving aircraft with it was genuinely difficult. Add in the weight, the tangle of complex systems, and a cannon that filled the gunner's compartments with smoke every time it fired, and what you had was an aircraft slower and clumsier than the bombers it was built to hunt. Only around 13 were ever finished. Not one of them saw combat. By early 1942, they had all been scrapped. Nearly every clever idea on the Airacuda made it heavier, more fragile, and worse at the single job it was designed for. Our last machine never even got the chance to be useless in service because it destroyed itself inside the first minute. Just after the First World War, a British construction firm run by a man named Tarrant decided to build a giant. The Tabor was, for one brief moment, the largest aircraft in the world, a vast triplane bomber meant to carry the war all the way to Berlin. 6 engines, a wingspan wider than the Lancaster bombers of the war that came after it. It was, honestly, magnificent to look at. The war it was designed to fight actually ended before it was finished, and for a while there was hope it might serve as a long-range airliner instead. The problem was hidden in where those engines went. 4 of them sat low, roughly in line with the fuselage, but to find room for all 6, the designers mounted the last 2 high up, between the upper wings, well above the center of the machine. And that is where the geometry turned lethal. When an engine's thrust sits high above the center of an aircraft, it does not simply push the aircraft forward, it pushes the nose down. On the 26th of May, 1919, at the airfield at Farnborough, the Tabor rolled out for its first flight. The crew taxied it, lifted the tail off the ground, and then opened up those two high-mounted upper engines. Instantly, the extra thrust pitched the nose forward and down. The great machine drove its own nose into the ground before it had truly left it, and the disaster was made worse by a decision that the men on board may never have fully understood. Against the builder's own wishes, around 1,000 pounds of lead ballast had been packed into the nose to correct a suspected balance problem, so the aircraft was already being forced nose down by its own engines, and it was carrying a weight of lead in exactly the wrong place. The two pilots, Captain Percy Rawlings and Captain Frederick Dunn, were both killed. The 5 other men on board survived. The inquiry that followed pointed to the high engines and the ballast and the rushed nature of the trial, but the full report was quietly buried to spare embarrassment. The Tabor never flew again. It was beaten not by an enemy and not by bad luck, but by its own shape, by a thrust line drawn a few feet too high on a sheet of paper. It would be easy to laugh at all 4 of these machines, and plenty of people do, but look closely, and none of them came from stupid people. They came from ambition running out ahead of understanding, a navy in love with a clever turret, a doctor certain he had outsmarted the birds, a company chasing a bold new shape, a builder reaching for the largest aircraft on Earth. Every one of them was trying to leap forward, and every one of them was undone by a single decision that the physics simply would not forgive. That is the quiet thread running under all of these wrecks. An aircraft does not care how confident you are, or how much money you spent, or how good your idea sounded in the room. It only answers to whether the numbers are right. And when they are not, the machine tells you, sometimes gently, sometimes with a name and a grave. If this is the kind of story you want more of, take a moment to subscribe so the next machine we bring back to life finds its way to you. And if you want to keep going right now, the videos on screen are waiting. 2 more flying machines and 2 more stories of ambition meeting the hard edge of reality. Thank you for watching.